Have you ever wondered why the ultralight backpacking community hates bushcraft survival so much? It's something I wonder about quite a bit, because ultralight backpacking actually gets its roots from bushcraft survival. Now, I know that sounds a little controversial, but hear me out. There's a lot of similarities that you may not have thought about. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what bushcraft is, probably the simplest way to explain it is enjoying spending time in the outdoors with as little as possible. Kind of sounds like ultralight backpacking, doesn't it? At its core, the whole idea behind bushcraft is to survive in the outdoors with as little equipment as possible and make it as comfortable as possible. Right? The bushcraft enthusiast will gladly give up creature comforts for a good pair of pants, a warm jacket, and a good knife. An ultralight backpacker is very similar. Ultralight backpacker sacrifices creature comforts in order to shed weight, right? The whole goal is to reduce grams. And that means everything in your kit has to have a multiple function or a multi-purpose. And sometimes you just have to learn to do without. An ultralight backpacker will often be found sleeping underneath a tarp or a super thin tent that's barely more than a tarp in itself. They'll be on a super thin sleeping pad and trying to convince themselves that they're comfortable and warm. A bushcrafter, very similarly, will either build a shelter or use a tarp, isn't afraid to cut branches and use leaves to build that mattress, and won't lie to themselves. And they'll admit it's not comfortable and they know they're going to be cold. Both ultralight backpackers and bushcrafters have learned to embrace that suffering in order for the larger gratitude and comfort of knowing that they're able to survive with their own skills and abilities. And they don't rely on modern technologies and creature comforts that the rest of us take for granted. When it comes to cooking, there's a few differences, but a lot more similarities also. An ultralight backpacker will carry the smallest portable stove possible, and oftentimes choose to cold soak food in order to save that additional weight. A bushcrafter skips the stove entirely and relies on a fire in order to cook their meals. The only major difference when it comes to food is ultralight backpackers tend to rely on, again, cold soaked meals or freeze-dried or dehydrated foods that just need to be rehydrated with hot water or cold water. Whereas a bushcrafter isn't concerned with the weight, so they tend to carry more robust foods where you have to cook. Quite often, meat and potatoes and something fun. Again, the weight doesn't matter, it's the reduced equipment that's important. So from here, the two groups go their separate ways. And I mean dramatically separate. Remember, an ultralight backpacker's core focus is to reduce grams. And that is across the board on everything. Now, let's use a medical kit, for example. When you talk bushcrafting medical kits or emergency kits, a bushcrafter is going to have a full emergency kit full of your basics, your leucotapes, your bandages, your ibuprofen, some tweezers. They're going to throw in a tourniquet. They're going to have different fire-starting materials. And you name it, it's going to be in there because preparedness is at the heart of bushcraft. Now, an ultralight backpacker, on the converse, is going to strip everything down to the bare basic essentials. a little bit of leukotape, some tweezers, and ibuprofen. That tends to be the extent of most ultralight backpackers' emergency medical kits. Right, wrong, or indifferent, you can decide what's right for you. But that's the core heart of it, right? The ultralight backpacker will even reduce some safety items in an effort to reduce overall grams. Whereas a bushcrafter who isn't concerned with weight is always going to make sure that their emergency kit is fully stocked and prepared for anything. But remember, their end goal is to never touch that emergency kit because they won't have to rely on their own skills and abilities to survive. Another key difference between ultralight backpackers and bushcrafters is their choice of clothing. An ultralight backpacker is going to tend to err towards more synthetic, lightweight clothes, and they can put on multiple layers depending on the elements. Whereas a bushcrafter is going to lean towards heavy-duty boots, good solid pants, and a warm jacket to protect against the elements. They're not nearly as concerned about multiple layers because weight is not an issue for them. But with this practice, both ultralight backpackers and bushcrafters are going to find themselves not always having the right gear for the right elements, and they have to make those sacrifices. So, even with some of the key differences, I still think that ultralight backpackers and bushcrafters are closer aligned than any other backpacking or camping group. Both bushcrafters and ultralight backpackers heavily rely on their basic skills, knowledge, and expertise to overcome the challenges of reduced equipment. Both fully immerse themselves in their experience, and that's part of the joy of their adventure. So, with all those similarities, I ask again, why do ultralight backpackers hate bushcrafters so much? So, whatever your camping or backpacking style is, I encourage you to try different techniques or incorporate some techniques from one of the other backpacking communities. You just might find that you've got a lot more in common than you realized. And at the end of the day, folks, we all have the same goal. It's to get out there, have an adventure, and embrace this beautiful world all around us. So until next time, folks, I hope to see you out there on the trail soon. Let's go for a walk.